皆さん、こんにちは。J リング坂部です。お元気ですか? How's it going, everyone? This is J Ring Sakabe, and today we are talking about verbs. Yes, verb types. It's so important to know what type a verb is in Japanese because, hey, if you want to say, I want to do something, or I must do something, can you please do something? I cannot do something. Like, that requires you to conjugate the verbs and add like different suffixes to the end of the verb. And in order to do that, you have to know what kind of verb you're using because depending on the type of the verb, the way you change it, it's going to, all be determined. So let's see how these are all different and how we can best remember them. Well, without further ado, we're going to jump straight into this. Here we go. Okay, so in Japanese, there are basically 3 different types of verbs. I call them ichidan verbs, godan verbs, and fukisoku verbs. And the reason why is because ichidan verbs All right, so here we are. We have our 3 different types of verbs. We have the ichidan verbs, the godan verbs, and the fukisoku verbs. If you're taking a Japanese course, your teacher may have told you about ichidan verbs and called them ru verbs. You might have heard of godan verbs as u verbs and fukisoku verbs as irregular verbs. Now, I have all of these verbs written out here in the dictionary form. What is the dictionary form, you may ask? Well, it's basically the form that a verb takes when it's in a dictionary. So check this out. If I write eat here, we get taberu. Notice how it's not tabemasu or tabetai desu or it's not anything like that, right? It's the most basic form a verb can take, which is why we call it the dictionary form. Some people call it the infinitive form. I think you know what I'm trying to say. The most basic, most essential form that a verb takes right here. So, now that we've seen that, let's go back to our blackboard. All these verbs here are in the dictionary form. This is the form that we need in order to know what type a verb is. So in other words, in order for you to be able to know what kind of verb you're dealing with and working with, you have to use the dictionary form. Okay, very important. Okay, now that we know that, we can actually look at these verbs, and just with the information given us here, we'll be able to figure out what's what. So here we have iru. Then we have eru, neru, and ikiru. Did you notice that they all have something in common? Let's look at them again. Iru, eru, neru, ikiru. Iru means to have, eru means to obtain, neru means to sleep, and ikiru means to live. And basically, they have noticed that they all end in ru. And you're like, yeah, dude, that was super obvious. Why they're called ru verbs, right? I mean, yes, but check this out over here. There's furu, and furu also ends in ru. So there's a little bit more these verbs than what meets the eye. And it's actually for this reason that, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of calling these things ru verbs. Sorry, Genki. I know that you like to call it that, and you're a good textbook and all, but I'm not a fan. Rather, I like to call them ichidan verbs because if you take off the ru at the end of the verb, that's like usually the one step you need to do before you can add in other suffixes. But, conjugating verbs, we'll save that for another time. So here in this area where it says do verbs, we can see that, they are basically verbs that end in either do or iru. Eru or iru. So back to the blackboard, you'll see that literally to have / to exist for living things here, this word iru is not only a verb, but it is the definition, half of the definition of an ichidan verb. And the word for obtain is the other half of the definition. However, we don't really need to be the hiragana I or the hiragana plus ru to be an ichidan verb. No. Because look at the third and fourth options. We have here to sleep, and to sleep is neru, and check that out. The in the ne character qualifies this as an ichidan verb. So it's more about the sounds you hear, less about what you see. So the E sound in ki is the hint that lets us know that ikiru is an ichidan verb. Okay, cool. So let's recap. How do we know what an ichidan verb is? It ends in either iru or it ends in eru. Let's move on to the irregulars, the fukisoku verbs. We have suru, and this means to do. It can also mean to play, depending on the context. Like if you're playing a video game, game wo suru. And then we have to come here, which is kuru. And that's it. These are the only irregular verbs in Japanese. Now, there's no sort of trick to memorizing these. You just have to remember them and like how they conjugate. But just, keep that in mind. It's not too hard, saying do and play and come. Those are very high frequency verbs. You'll get used to using those in no time. Okay. Now, how can you tell what a godan verb is? It's every other verb. I'm going to say that again because it's important. It is literally every other verb, okay? So if it's not a kisoku verb, and if it's not an ichidan, it's a godan. So in other words, kau, matsu, furu, tobu, and nomu. These are all different examples of godan verbs. If we look at their endings, yes, they all end in an u sound, so you can see why some textbooks like to call it that. But, they really don't have a whole lot in common besides that. Kau ends in an u, but then we have matsu. By the way, kau means to buy, matsu means to wait, furu means a lot of things. I'm going to translate it, though, as like to fall, as in like ame ga furu, the rain falls or it rains, or yuki ga furu, it's snowing, or snow falls literally. Tobu is to fly, and then nomu is to drink. And there we go. So we have, once again, if a verb ends in iru or eru, it's an ichidan. If it's suru or kuru, it's an irregular verb, and everything else is a godan. Now, this brings us to something we need to be very careful of, and it is the non-official list of common pesky cheeky godan verbs. Oh, cheeky. Yes. So what do we have here? These are basically verbs that end in iru and eru, but are not ichidan verbs. Oh my god. Yes, they exist. We have these godan verbs, which also end in iru and eru, but the list of pesky godans is relatively small, and the ones at least in this list are very common, so it's pretty easy to remember them. You definitely want to start out with these 7, and down in the description for this video, I'm going to include a more comprehensive, full-on list of all of these pesky / cheeky godan verbs. So you can, check in with those anytime you want. But let's go ahead and check out these most common ones, because you will need to know these. Yeah. Number one is to return, go, or come home, and that's kairu. So in its polite form, that would be kairimasu. The te form would be kaite. We have then kiru, which is to cut, and its polite form is kirimasu, and te form is kitte. Then we have iru, which means to need or want something. The polite form is irimasu, and then we have the te form itte. Shiru is to know, to be familiar with, acquainted with something, and the polite form is shirimasu. Then we have shitte. We have hashiru, which is to run, which its polite form becomes hashirimasu. Then we have hashitte. Then we have hairu, which is like to enter something, to go inside something, and its polite form is hairimasu, followed by haitte. Right here we have to take a bath, literally to enter the bath in Japanese, and it's ofuro ni hairu. And then our last most common pesky, cheeky godan verb is shaberu, and its polite form is shaberimasu and shabette in the te form. So there you go. We once again need to memorize these, and remember that they are godan verbs, that second group. And so they are going to be conjugated like all other godans, not like ichidan verbs. Okay, so that's it for me today. I sure hope that was helpful and you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or concerns, drop a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I had a fun time teaching it. And I will see you next time. それじゃあ、また次回。
最後まで見ていただきありがとうございます。また次のレッスンでお会いしましょう。